You're listening to the Mindful Connections podcast from Understood Media, hosted by creative director and marketing consultant Ollie Martin.
Welcome to a guest interview.
In 2022, I introduced 4 of my clients to Datum data centers, where Ian, the head of operations, provided a fully guided tour of the data center with insights which were so inspiring they were worth us all shouting about. So, what is a data center?
It's basically where, to use a buzzword really, or a marketing expression, is where the internet lives. So yeah, data center is a big box that where you securely power, securely host, and keep equipment cool. That's basically what we do.
So there's certain types of data centers, if I'm correct. There's like cloud data centers, and then there's edge data centers, and then obviously more green data centers that are based, right? Can you?
That's true, but that is a marketing spin. So basically, data centers are all the same thing. They're all buildings that host IT equipment. So it doesn't really matter what you're using it for. They all do the same thing. They do it in different ways. They use different systems, and they might use different power provision, different cooling mechanisms, might have different security, but they essentially do the same job.
You're listening to the Mindful Connections podcast from Understood Media.
Hi Ian, welcome to the pod, and thank you for taking your time to join us on the mic.
Thank you, Ollie.
Please introduce yourself, your name, your job title, and your time in the role.
Okay, my name's Ian Mace. I'm head of data center operations at Datum Data Centers. We're based in Farnborough, so I look after the day-to-day operation of 3 data centers now, 2 in Manchester, 1 in Farnborough. I've been working for Datum since 2016. Prior to that, I worked for Vodafone, based in Newbury, for quite a long time, which is where I learnt my craft, if you like, and learnt an awful lot about the way data center platforms actually operate.
So what would you say is the most interesting part of your day-to-day job? Or it doesn't have to be day-to-day, but certainly within your role. What do you enjoy doing the most? What's the most interesting part?
Actually, to be honest, for me, it's probably the people. So I come from a technology background, IT technology background. And if I'm honest, never really my thing, never really enjoyed it that much. But what I did find interesting was the places you house IT equipment in. And that was how I got involved in data centers. What it does mean is that I understand how IT people, technology people think, and I can converse with them. And I find the most interesting part is translating that physical, tangible element of what they want into a service that a client really wants.
Okay, so as a key industry consultant, what should customers these days be looking for in their selection or shortlist of a data center? Because I assume there's plenty of options out there in the market.
There are. I mean, they all do quite a similar thing, but the way they wrap it up or the way they present it is very different. So what do people want? Well, first and foremost, they want somewhere that's resilient, reliable, and safe to keep their systems. Beyond that, quite a lot of people want quite bespoke requirements, and that seems to have become a bit of a niche for us of late. So, having a standardized environment is great with the bigger sites. It all works very well. But if you have something that's slightly oddball, off to the side, something's a little bit, a bit developing environment, that sort of thing, then a site like ours makes a lot of sense because we're small enough that we can be agile. The bigger players, a bit like turning a super tank, they do what they do very well, but they're not particularly easy to come up with a bespoke solution.
Having had the pleasure of a guided tour of one of your data centers, I was completely amazed at all the considerations which lead to safety and security, and of course all the energy saving practices that you do as well. But out of those practices, what would you say is the most surprising to clients, impresses them?
I think, funnily enough, it's some of the more basic infrastructure elements to it. So over the time I've been there, 9 years that I've been at Datum, I found the one thing that really stands out for most people and sticks in their memories, showing them generators. So big tangible lumps of metal, noisy things.
And this is massive. They are massive.
They are massive.
I couldn't believe it when you open the doors to.
They're huge. They're the size of a house. Yeah. So, and that's a very basic thing for a data center, and yet it's an insurance policy that we almost never use. So a very, very expensive investment for something you don't use much. What always surprises people is how much of that infrastructure we've invested in. As a business, I think they describe it as asset heavy, infrastructure asset heavy, and people light. We have these huge £30 million data centers, and there's only 26 of us, I think, in the company. And it just goes to demonstrate how much you have to invest in the physical, tangible infrastructure to build a secure hosting environment.
So for those of you that are listening, I actually had a fantastic tour around Datum with a handful of my clients. It was a couple of years ago now. Ian gave us a fantastic personalised tour. And we had pre-checks with passports. I don't know how much detail I can actually drill down on this, but there's a certain the site that Ian was working at the time is his HQ. My goodness, I mean.
Yeah, well, the thing is, there's layers of security. So most security infrastructure is based around layers, really. So there's an outer infrastructure to the site we're on. So it's a secure business park, is the way they describe it. That gives you its own security, level of security, peripheral security. That's the word I'm looking for. Within that, we have our own security infrastructure. So we've got our own security team in the data center. But there's various levels of electronic security to get as far as that. So get as far as reception and the front gate, which isn't the bit I'm going to talk about too much. Though once you get into the data center, as you say, there's all sorts of levels of controls and checks and so on. Every client has a bespoke security solution, let's put it that way. Sometimes it's just a unique key lock rack. Other times, it can go as far as secure cages with infrared detection systems. And in one example, an armed response to the gate if you set the alarm off. And then, there's multiple levels, and it's all very much dependent on client demand at the end of the day.
Sure. What client wants, client gets.
What client wants, pays for, client gets, yeah.
As long as they pay for it.
Yeah.
Well, I was gobsmacked by the head of security at your centre. I think he was XSAS or something. So straight away we were...
I've heard of him described as part pensioner, part Jack Russell.
He could probably kill a man. Very good. Okay, so can you give us a quick run through of your career path pre-Datum? So before Vodafone, what were you up to?
Okay, well, I left school pretty much straight from school into a tool making apprenticeship. Whilst it was an interesting thing and I did enjoy it, it really wasn't really my thing. I didn't really know what I wanted to do beyond that. And an opportunity arose. Just a friend said, "Oh, are you interested in IT?" And I went, "I don't know, I'll have a go." So I went and joined a civil engineering company, actually, as a computer operator, they used to call them then. So basically putting up mag tapes and doing backups, things like that. I did that for a couple of years. And then I got a job working also as a computer operator, working for Digital Equipment Corporation, who then became HP and became Compaq, and then ultimately became HP. And worked in that environment, doing IT platform management. That seems such a long time ago. After that, I went travelling for a year and then came back and sort of fell into another IT role in Vodafone. So Vodafone was based in Newbury, and it was in the early years really when Vodafone was just growing like you wouldn't believe, hand over fist.
Oh, that HQ was quite something.
It was before the HQ was built.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, so there were 65 Vodafone buildings in Newbury at the time.
So what year was this then?
91.
Wow,
so
okay.
Vodafone's first, they had the first mobile phone call in 1985, so they were only 6 years old, really, at the time. So anyway, I became part of that. I sort of bounced around Vodafone doing all sorts of different IT delivery jobs, and I got to know some of the data center managers that worked in Vodafone at the time, and that really piqued my interest in the whole tangible nature of data centers, because IT is quite a esoteric sort of thing to do. You're not really producing anything that you can touch. Data centers so tangible it's untrue. They are big chunky things. They really exist. There's
footprint.
there's a huge footprint. Yeah, there's a huge footprint. And so that really worked for me. I found that far more interesting than the IT systems within them, to be honest. But what was good was that I sort of learnt a good grasp of how M&E infrastructure operates, but I could equate it to the requirements of the IT infrastructure that sat in it. So that's how I sort of got into data centers. Worked in a couple of different roles in Vodafone, and then I found Vodafone got just a bit too big, and that led me to go to work for Datum as a DC manager. And Datum, I think I was employee number 8 at the time. Yeah. So going from what was, when I left, the largest company in the world by some measures, to a company of 8 people was a huge culture shock. But it was brilliant because, you know, the only person I had to convince to spend potentially £1 million was the CEO.
Wow.
So I'd get a yes or a no, often a no, but I'd get a yes or a no same day.
Small
that just doesn't happen.
And agile. There's a lot to be said from coming from a big corporation into a small business and pulling all the strings and delivering and hitting your achievements and your goals and having all the experience you had behind you.
Yeah, it was interesting, and it was very liberating actually. And I think what Datum has taught me, you know, I sort of knew data centers anyway, but what it's really taught me is that is about how businesses operate and how the small things are so much more important. You know, in a big company, you're just, dare I say it, you're a cog in the massive machine. Whereas in a small company of a dozen odd people, and you know now 20 something people, everything you do matters. You can't hide. You know, so I've never had a job I've worked so hard, frankly. But equally, I've never had a job that I cared about as much. Small companies, everybody should do it at some point.
I fully agree. Forecasting the rate of expansion must fall into your own personal strategy, right?
Yeah, it does.
Having seen how quickly the halls and floors at your Farnborough data centre filled up, and Manchester 2 must also be filling up quickly now, right?
Yeah.
Have you noticed with the introduction of AI integration that server demand rate has increased for your clients across the board? What is there anything along those lines?
It changes. So when you look at it, there's various changes in digital media, whatever you want to call it, IT infrastructure that happens. So, you know, a few years ago it was virtualization. There's been other things along the way. The latest thing is AI. They all have an impact, no question. And, you know, you see sort of steps in change of demand. But they all still require something to run on at the end of the day. You also have infrastructure there, and that's why the data centers exist. Does it change the requirement? Yes and no. You know, the data center is a finite resource. It can't just grow. It can't just grow without consuming resources. So, you know, it has had an impact, but we have to deliver those services in the most sustainable and efficient manner we possibly can. So, yeah, our footprint's growing. There's no question of that. But you have to do it in a way that supports both the growth of our business, but the growth of the industry.
That's a good response, because that actually brings me on to what are the greatest challenges facing UK data centres?
Okay, well, they've got data centres at the moment have got a bit of an identity crisis, I think, and a bit of a PR challenge. So just to give you a good stat, 2.5% of the UK's energy usage, I'd put it rather than production, is used by data centres. Wow. And there's a forecast out there that suggests that in 25 years, it will become 10% of the UK's energy production. So
full steam ahead with these nuclear power stations, then.
Well, that's an interesting thing, because you know, 30 years ago, nuclear power stations were seen as spawn of the devil.
Yeah,
they were awful.
Of course.
And at the moment, often they're being touted as the interim solution. You know, not the end solution.
It's the only choice.
It's the only choice. Yeah. But you know, having said that, there's all sorts of sustainable alternatives out there. You know, we're using
more costly, but certainly more sustainable.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, all the energy we use comes from a sustainable source.
Lovely. That's a huge tick box for your new clients.
Yes, I've got to say that, haven't I?
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
You're here to promote.
But of course we do. So all of our primary energy sources are sourced through renewables. So hydro, PV, sometimes wave, you know, all sorts of different things. I think there's some wind in that blend as well. And our Backup power sources is using vegetable oil now. We don't use diesel. We use, well, that's not entirely true. We're migrating away from diesel.
Yeah.
So the majority of our offline generation now is using HVO, which is hydro-treated vegetable oil.
But you don't turn those generators on much.
Well, we test them once a week.
Oh, yes, you do test.
We do
yes,
test
you
them
have
once a week.
to.
So
Yeah.
not much point in having them if they don't work. So you've got to test them.
When you press that big red button
Yeah.
and nothing happens.
They do. They're
They've
exactly
seized
that.
up.
Yeah. No, you have to look after them. You
course.
have to look after them. They're
Yeah.
big. They're too big an asset not to look after. Yeah. So sustainability is probably the biggest challenge in some respects. So, you'll see a lot of things out there about how you get power for data centers. There's in some areas of the world, some areas of Europe actually, getting power is difficult. There has been in the recent past moratoriums on building new data centers in Dublin, for example, which was a hub because of the power they use.
Yeah.
So that is an issue. But I think sustainability is the big thing at the moment.
You're bringing me on perfectly again to my next question. And obviously, sustainability comes at a huge cost.
It does.
Right?
Yep.
So what are the advantages are there to having UK-based data centres when you could have much cheaper running costs in an international-based premises?
This is true. It's an interesting one because there's lots of different reasons, and certain clients will have different drivers. So data sovereignty is one thing. That has been quite a big thing in the recent past. As there's also logistics and practicality. So surprisingly, in this day and age, dare I say it again, that people like to be fairly close to their IT equipment, and that even now has a bearing. You think that it doesn't matter where it is in the world. If you can put your kit wherever you like, wherever it's cheap. But a lot of companies still require them to be within reach,
and more so if it's bespoke.
Yes.
And like you say, you're an agile data center, so you will have that hardware.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, so we've built very bespoke environments for people, or perhaps more to the point, allowed them to build bespoke environments that work for their business growth. Because the co-location model historically has been quite so it's known as data center co-location is the expression for hosting IT equipment in data centers. So the co-location model has traditionally been fairly sort of limiting. It has to be built in this way, it has to be hosted like this. This is how it's powered. This is how you're going to get charged. If you don't like it, that's tough. But one of the I suppose the drivers for the business I'm in now has always been we build a decent quality product, a good quality data center, but that we will provide the additional level of client service and bespoke nature of clients, bespoke nature of infrastructure, perhaps a better way to put it, to suit that client requirement. And that seems to be quite a successful formula.
So can you tell us an interesting story from your career which has made you look back with a lesson well learned, or maybe it's around crisis management or an interesting observation or fantastic breakthrough in technology? I want to hear an interesting story from your career that comes from the data center that a lot of people probably wouldn't have heard of or know about.
Well, I worked for a big company at one point where we were hosting. This is quite a while back, so
no names mentioned.
No names mentioned. Where we had a small data center not far from where we're sitting now, actually.
Oh.
And they hosted their UK billing system in the data center, but they didn't invest in the data center. They didn't really spend money they should have spent on it. So we fought for funding to make changes to improve that infrastructure. Didn't really get it because the data center is not core business. You can't sell a data center if you have another business function, let's say.
And this was many years ago. So back then it wasn't seen as...
No, it wasn't, no. So eventually got some money to upgrade the infrastructure. It was all about backup power and generators and stuff like that. But in order to do the upgrade, we were going to have to shut the data center down. So I spent 6 months convincing all the business unit leads that it would be a good idea to shut the site down. Because if we didn't do it in a planned way, it wasn't going to be long before it did it all on its own.
Yeah.
So I spent 6 months convincing all these people that it was a good idea. And we eventually got the agreement to do it. I got the buy-in from the facility teams. They were happy to do the work on the infrastructure. So one Saturday night, I think it was a Saturday night, We shut all the equipment in the data center down.
Ian was working that weekend.
It was a busy weekend.
Stressful one.
It sticks in my memory. Yeah, I've had a few, but this was the one that stood out. And we shut all the equipment down. Then we shut the data center down, turned all the power off, and believe you me, quiet data center is a terrifying place.
Yeah.
So it's completely silent. We didn't even have lights, and so I let the guys get on with the work they needed to do.
It sounds like it's taking me back to like Chernobyl.
It was that sort of feel. Yeah, it was a bit. Yeah, it was a bit sort of 28 weeks later. What's happened? Where's everybody gone? Yeah. I was walking around waiting for them to finish what they needed to do. And then the guy who was leading the project, the facility side of the project, came up to me and said, I don't think we can get the power back on. And I was like, what?
No.
Sorry, what? And I said, I don't think we can get the power back. And I was going, well, hang on a minute. What do you mean? I don't understand. Honestly, I couldn't understand what he meant.
You thought he was
joking. What do you mean?
Yeah,
it just wouldn't go in. And he said, we can't get the power back. And I walked off for a minute. And he came back. He said, I've got an idea. I said, okay. And I had to go for a walk. Literally, I had to walk around in circles outside for half an hour. It was like -1 or something, and just had to go outside. I couldn't be near it. And he came back. He said, "Oh, sorry, worked it out now. It's fine." And it was like, and we turned it all back on again. But for that half-hour period, I was literally crapping myself. I thought, it was a multinational company, and the billing system for that company was turned off. And I didn't think we were going to get it back. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? That's it. That's Tesco's trolley recovery for me.
Well, I would have thought power. I know how essential it is here, right? But I would have thought power is probably minimal compared to other issues that could occur. For example, national disasters are one of the most as risk factors come for data centers. That's right up
environmental impacts. Yeah, you're right. It is. I mean, if you're going to run a data center, South England is a good place to run a data center because the national grid is, compared to a lot of places in the world, very strong. If you lived in, say, Texas, I'm told, never been there, but I'm told the power goes off all the time. Yeah. So, we've had, real instances of the power going off and generators coming on, literally a handful of times. Actually, not even that. But in Texas, it happens apparently on a weekly basis, and certainly every season. In the stormy seasons. So you take power for granted, but when you do data centers, it's not. It's a privilege. In this part of the world, we're very privileged to have secure power.
And we must have a lot of data centers around these parts.
Yeah. Well, there's I reckon within 5 miles of where we're sat now, there's at least 4.
Really?
Yeah, and you didn't even know it.
I didn't know.
Yeah. And so
they're all competitors.
Sort of.
Okay.
Yeah, sort of. But I mean, it's almost like a hidden industry.
Yeah. You don't want anyone to know where a data center is, do you?
Nobody really talks about them.
No.
And it's only in the recent years that data centers have become popularized, if you like, and people just don't go to them. I mean, we did that tour together. I think, what was it 6 or 7 guys you brought that day? They're all technology people involved in running smaller technology companies, I think. Yeah. And I think only one of them had ever been in a data center. Yeah. And I, like that blows my mind because, I've lived my professional life in data centers and I know full well that they're the primary building block for all of the technology that we've got out there.
But at the same time, a data center is not a place you want to have a large footfall of people.
No.
And
the best day is when nobody comes in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also now, everything can be done remotely.
This is true, yeah. There was much bigger footfalls in data centers when people had to go there to do everything, to get everything done. But it's changed, it's absolutely changed. But there's still plenty of server huggers out there who want to touch their equipment.
But for the majority of your customers at Datum, I believe, from the tour and when we were having the conversation, you mostly have arranged engineers of your own that will go in and upgrade or see over hardware.
That's right. Yeah. So we've got a team of like facility experts that look after the power and the cooling, that sort of stuff that report into me. They're third parties, to be fair, and we use those guys to look after the power, the cooling, I say. And then there's another team, an internal team. They are responsible for reacting to any client requirements. So That might be just going to press a button. That might be installing a server into a rack. It might be helping people get the hardware set up ready so that they can remotely configure it. So, in principle, not everybody does it, but in principle, you could send your equipment to our data center. We could put it in the rack, plug in all the cables, connect it to whatever carrier service it is that you want, and you would never have to come.
So Ian, you've previously launched quite a few data centers, and you just launched Manchester, and you gave me an invite to come up and see the launch of that, which unfortunately I couldn't make, but it looked fantastic, and what a facility. But you're now prepping for V2 in Farnborough as well.
Yeah, so MCR2, Manchester 2, it was is our third data center. So Datum has a site in Farnborough as well. So our original site is Farnborough 1, and actually, the day before yesterday, we actually broke ground on the build of FRN2. So the diggers are in. And
in the car park, so there's nowhere to park your cars now.
There's nowhere to park the cars, but we're building a lovely data centre. So yeah, that's in flight now. So that's I think the build plan says it should be finished by January 27. So it's about a year. Yeah, I think it'll be a bit longer than that. And actually, to get to the point where the diggers actually came in, it's so much work. Yeah. So much work. And don't get me wrong, I'm only just part of a bigger team. There's so many people involved in this, and it's again an eye opener. Construction, buildings from the ground up. There's so much work involved. There's so much to consider. The Manchester site. I learnt about rainwater attenuation, something I'd never dealt with before. I thought I did data centers and IT and that. No, you look at things like water attenuation. So just to give you an example.
Please.
So in the Manchester site, there's a swimming pool sized water tank underground, which is used to capture the storm runoff from the roof before it's slowly released into the storm sewers. And the reason for that is because so weather patterns in the UK have changed over the last 20 years. So 20 years ago, you'd get 3 days of drizzle, very English weather.
Yeah.
Now you get 20 minutes of monsoon. The same amount of water comes down, but it all happens in 20 minutes. So what happens to that? Well, what's happened in recent times is you get all these flash floods, and you get houses and housing estates getting flooded for 20 minutes.
That's because everyone's building on floodplains.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's part of it. But the weather patterns is the other part. So you build a building like that, anybody that's in construction would know this. I didn't know it. You have to build storm water attenuation into the data center. I mean, you think that would be, that wouldn't have anything to do with data centers, but of course it does, because it's a big old roof. Yeah. And that's the case for any construction. So, that's your starting point. Okay. That's the construction of the shell of it. And then you have to think about all of the M&E, so the mechanical and the electrical infrastructure that goes in it, as well as you have to think about the density of the infrastructure that you're going to put in it. So you have to work out the density of the client infrastructure that you can sell in order to get the return on the data center. And depending on the site and depending on what you're doing, there's a magic number you end up coming to say, right, you have to sell this much power. And all of those things, and then on top of that, there's all the design of the M&E and the UPS and the generators and the distribution, the bus bars and the tap-offs and blah, blah, blah. All of that has to happen as well. So I'm gobsmacked how many people get involved. You sit on
project management.
Yeah, but also the different professions. Yeah. There's professions I hadn't heard of before that get involved in building data centers, and it's just
environmental people.
Oh yeah, well I haven't even talked about that. Yeah. So you end up doing surveys, wildlife surveys, and things like that. So yeah, it's just massive. It's massive,
and that's why it costs 30 million to build a data center these days. But it seems investment isn't short because the demand is
there.
Yeah,
the demand's there. So I think that's been a big change for the industry or the business I work in. It was finding investment that are prepared to invest in significant funds to grow the business. And I should also point out, we're a small data center compared to the big boys. The Equinix's DRT, well, not so much DRT, but certainly Equinix is a great example. They're massive. They've grown like you wouldn't believe, and they dwarf Datum. Yeah. But they're also a big corporate, so from my perspective, it doesn't have the same appeal to work for as a Datum does.
Sure, and of course for different clients' needs and requirements. At the end of the day, if you rock up with racks of bespoke gear, they're probably not going to be as entertaining. I don't know, they might be, but I know how entertaining you are with that side of things and
actually, it's one of the,
I should say.
Well, yeah, I must admit, I actually talking to the people about what they want and why they want it, and sometimes it's a case of what's the point of doing that? Why are you doing that? And showing people around the data center is probably the most enjoyable part of it. Is it's people at the end of the day, and it's funny how something that is such a technology focused industry is all about people at the end of the day, and you've got to convince the people.
Well, as a marketeer, I think you're missing a bit of a trick here, and I think I put a huge value on that tour. You could be doing a one-er on per person for those tours, because
maybe we should charge for them.
Maybe, right?
It's like a day out.
Yeah, I could design the ticket and the flyer, and we could have, that we could put a little booking system on your website.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. I'll have a chat with our CEO, see how he feels about that. Yeah.
We're gonna charge clients now.
For tours, a day out.
There's also a mindful connection here. One of my other clients, Contract Energy Management, are a HVAC provider and work with other UK data centres, providing cooling and decarbonising solutions. I've since made the introduction, and it's up to them to work out the value proposition of working together. Thanks, Ian, for your answers and discussion today. I encourage any of my clients to get in touch with you should they require any insight or inquiries on Datum's server hosting solutions. I will include a link to your LinkedIn profile in the comments below, or alternatively, you can visit datum.co.uk and get in touch.